This is Power Hour with Gabriella Power.
Hello and welcome to Power Hour. I'm Gabriella Power. Thank you for joining us. Well, it has become very awkward for singer Billie Eilish. As we know, it was just a few days ago she had this to say at the Grammys.
No one is illegal on stolen land.
So, party at Billie's house? Is everyone invited? GB News reporter Ben Leo went to find out if she practices what she preaches. This is how it went.
According to the driveway, Billie does believe in borders. She believes in massive gates keeping people out. A couple of cameras up there as well. The lights are on, so somebody must be home. Let us in, please, Billie. We are here because this is stolen land, Billie, and we think we should be given access to your quite lovely $3 million mansion. And such is Billie's concern for security and privacy. It's surrounded by pretty decent security fencing. Very nice indeed. Massive security hedges as well.
Can you believe he didn't get in? What a shock. Brilliant stuff from Ben Leo right there. But he's not the only one trying to see if Billie is willing to let anyone and everyone into her home. Australian Drew Pavlou launched a GoFundMe, which has now been taken down, but with the intention of flying over to America to make himself right at home at one of Billie's beautiful places. He posted on X, "I'm flying to the USA next Friday to attempt to move into Billie Eilish's beachside Malibu mansion. No human being is illegal on stolen land. Support my travel and filming costs right here." Here is Drew on the Rita Panahi Show.
It would be important to test this theory that, nobody is illegal on stolen land. So I want to test it out. And I know she's got this beautiful mansion in Malibu that's worth $6 million. So I'm going to fly over. I'm going to literally fly over as a non-American. And as we know, no one's illegal on stolen land. And I'll just sit outside until somebody asks me to leave.
I think she will allow you to move in and live with her because I'm sure she's a woman of her word.
Yes, it is getting more embarrassing for Billie by the day. Look, every country has its healthcare problems, but America's Medicare system is on another level. Millions of seniors end up on the wrong plan every year. They either overpay, lose access to their doctors, or both, not because they did anything wrong, but because the system is designed to confuse them. And it gets worse. A lot of Medicare advisors are really just salespeople pushing whichever plan pays them the biggest commission. That's why I want to tell all of my American Power Hour viewers about Chapter. Chapter doesn't work for big insurance or the government. They're independent. In fact, they're the only advisor that compares every Medicare plan nationwide to find one that actually fits your needs. On average, that saves people about $1,100 a year. Just have a read of the testimonials. One woman, Jill, said that Chapter showed her better options that didn't even appear on the Medicare.gov website. That's how broken the system is and how valuable it is to have someone truly on your side. So if you're looking for Medicare guidance, don't go it alone. Call the number below to speak with Chapter and get clear, unbiased guidance on your Medicare options. Joining us now is the president of the Centre of the American Experiment, John Hinderaker, and Signal principal and pollster, Nick Weinstein. Thank you both so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Let's start with Ryan Routh, the man, of course, who tried to assassinate Donald Trump. He has been sentenced to life in prison. He was found guilty of attempting to assassinate Donald Trump on his golf course in West Palm Beach in September 2024. John, this was, of course, the second assassination attempt that the president faced in the space of just a couple of months in 2024 during the election campaign. What are your thoughts on this sentence being handed down today?
Well, the sentence is certainly appropriate, Gabriella, but what I would emphasize is that there was hardly any press coverage of this trial. Routh represented himself. He gave an opening statement in which Routh, the attempted assassin, kept talking about Adolf Hitler, and the judge finally cut him off. But what that shows is that Routh had absorbed the slanders the top Democrats have continually hurled at Donald Trump, saying he's just like Hitler, he's a Nazi, he's a fascist, another Hitler. They say those things every day. And Ryan Routh apparently believed them. If you took the Democrats seriously, you should try to assassinate Trump. It makes perfect sense. You should be viewed as a hero. And I think that's the untold story of this case.
Nick, do you agree with that? I think it's an interesting point that it hasn't really received that much significant media attention. And I'd also argue we don't know a whole lot about him.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. And look, I think we're in a time right now where a lot of Americans, people across the world, they like to, get conspiratorial and think that there's things that, the government aren't telling them about, major incidents, particularly, these assassination attempts on President Trump. But I think the reality is a lot more scary, and I don't think the left wants to wake up to it. The fact is, for 8 years, they've compared President Trump to Hitler, and they've in fact said that Republicans are fair targets because of their political beliefs. And it's certainly what spurred, the 2 assassination attempts on President Trump. It's probably what spurred the assassination attempt on Charlie Kirk as well. And political violence is something that the left is going to have to start to take seriously.
And we just saw how close that first assassination attempt was on Donald Trump's life. The man, Thomas Matthew Crooks, he's someone that we certainly don't know much about at all. Fox News host Brett Baer pressed FBI Director Kash Patel over the lack of detail surrounding Thomas Matthew Crooks, who, of course, attempted to assassinate Trump at a rally in Butler in 2024. Let's just listen to that exchange.
I don't think we, the public, have a more robust picture of that shooter.
Well, I think that's an unfair supposition. We, the FBI, have put out all the information that we possibly and legally can while protecting any ongoing matters that are unrelated.
But he's dead.
Well, yes, he's very much dead. But at the same time, Brett, we at the FBI have to follow the parameters of our investigation and what the law allows us to release.
I get it, but what were the cell phones? Why don't we know who he was talking to? What exactly happened? I feel like we haven't gotten the whole picture about Butler even now.
But here's the thing, Brett. We can provide, and just an example here, we've provided 40,000 pages of documents to Congress. That's a 400% increase from the prior 2 directors. We will continue to provide this information with our partners on Capitol Hill when we are legally able. It's never going to be enough for everyone. It's never going to be enough. But what we are saying is, we're not saying trust us. We're saying we did an exhaustive search of that.
John, I want to get your thoughts. Look, I agree with Brett. I think it's really, if you look at the coverage last year, it was really the work of Miranda Devine and other journalists to track down Crooks's cyber history. That only came out last year. It seems there's still a lot we don't know.
Well, Gabriella, Republicans in particular think it's bizarre how little we know about Thomas Crooks. We know nothing about what led up to the assassination attempt. We don't know why he did it. We don't know whether there were other people that he was in contact with. I understand the need to investigate and there are legal constraints, but it's been a year and a half with virtually no information made public. And I agree, it's time to learn something about what happened here.
Nick, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I give Kash Patel some grace here because certainly, he inherited several cases that had just been completely mismanaged under the Biden administration, both of these assassination attempts being a couple really high-profile ones. But I go back to the point that I made earlier when we were talking about Thomas Routh. I mean, the reality here may be the scary truth that these are folks that were radicalized online, that they were lone actors suffering from, mental health-related issues. And, I think at a certain point, if that's the reality, it's incumbent on us to put that out there and really start to confront Democrats on their rhetoric because it's radicalizing folks in our backyard and it's spurring them to violence.
Let's turn to voter ID. Nicki Minaj posted on X this week what sensible, forward-thinking, cutting-edge leading nation is having a debate on whether or not there should be voter ID. Like they're actually fighting not to have people present ID while voting for your leaders. Do you get it? Do you get it now? It's interesting. CNN has admitted that the majority of Americans agree with Nicki Minaj here.
83% in the last year of Americans agree with Nicki Minaj. They favor photo ID to be able to vote.
What about by party? What's the party breakdown?
Yeah, normally you might expect, hey, there'd be a big divide by party with Republicans really for it and Democrats really against it. but not really here. I mean, just take a look here. Favor photo ID to vote. You got 95% of Republicans, pretty much all of them, but even 71% of Democrats favor photo ID to vote.
Nick, they're pretty big numbers.
Yeah, and it's consistent with the polls that we've done at Signal too. It's always in the high 70s to low 80s. This is a bipartisan consensus type issue, and quite frankly, I'm glad that someone like Nicki Minaj, who's not day in and day out in politics, is speaking out about this, because the message that we're hearing from Democrats, it's frankly offensive to suggest that Black voters and voters of color can't get an ID, and thus we can't implement voter ID. Americans, we show ID to buy alcohol, to drive, to fly, to exercise our Second Amendment rights, and to suggest that Black voters don't have IDs is just frankly laughable and offensive.
Yeah. John, can I get your take?
Yeah, so Americans have generally lost confidence in the security and the integrity of our elections. And voter ID really kind of is symbolic. It stands for the desire to have more secure elections, and it always polls 75% or better. So why doesn't it pass? The Democrats actually tried to pass legislation to make it illegal for any state to require voter ID. Now, why would they take such an unpopular position? I think the only plausible answer is that voter fraud must be an important part of the Democrats' election strategy.
I want to talk to you both about the Epstein files. Of course, the DOJ released 3 million plus Epstein files last week. It appears as though Trump and JD Vance might have split on what happens next. Trump has said that it's time for the country to get on to something else. JD Vance told the Daily Mail that he'd be open to Andrew, that being former Prince Andrew, testifying before Congress. Nick, with the new release of these files, it's not all the files. There are still some millions actually, being hidden away. But with this new release, how is this impacting politics? Do people really care about it, or do they agree with Trump? Do they want to move on?
Yeah, I think the releases thus far have been a major vindication for President Trump. Trump, who basically said, we were going to get into office, we're going to take a look, but concluded that there was really nothing there. I think what we're seeing is that the American voter, they're much more concerned about, the pocketbook issues, the economic issues, that's what's going to drive voters as they go to the polls here in 2026. But I think what's most telling about the lack of, anything in these files is just how quickly the Democrats have moved beyond their Trump-Epstein, rhetoric and on to the next, anti-Trump conspiracy du jour. I think this is kind of a nothing burger for the average American, and it is somewhat amusing to me that the three names that are standing out there right now as caught up in the crossfire are Bill and Hillary Clinton, who may be called to testify in Congress, and then of course the former Prince Andrew.
John, what's your assessment, what you're hearing on the ground? Do people want more transparency, a proper investigation for this to continue to drag on? And ultimately, we do need to get to the bottom of it and as much truth as possible. Or do people really want to move on? Are people more concerned with the economy, crime rates? What's your sense on this?
Well, I think most people want to move on. I'm with President Trump on this one. The files do contain evidence of sleazy behavior. They're embarrassing to people like Bill Gates, but I think we should move on to more important issues. This is not a partisan matter. Epstein was a Democrat. His friends were mostly Democrats and academics. He hated Donald Trump, but I don't think there's value in embarrassing public figures, and I think it's time to move on to more substantial issues.
Okay, I want to turn to the growing tensions with Iran. The US and Iran will apparently be holding talks on Friday in Amman, according to CBS News. Now, this, of course, follows an incident earlier this week where we saw the US shoot down an Iranian drone that Caroline Leavitt said was acting aggressively towards a US aircraft carrier. Nick, what is happening here? Are the talks breaking down, or are we going to be getting peace, or are we going to be getting war?
Well, I think, President Trump is rightfully emboldened because he's found this America First ability to project power abroad, and is showing the world that America First doesn't necessarily mean America isolated. And, if I'm the the Ayatollah in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. I'm not sleeping well having watched what the United States and Israel were able to accomplish on our nuclear strikes on Iran. And certainly after the masterclass that President Trump put on capturing Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, I think somewhat paradoxically, this is the best and only opportunity that the Iranian regime is going to have to make a deal with President Trump. This isn't the Biden or the Obama administration where, they're going to be able to walk all over us and cross red lines. I think Trump's going to come to the table, or his representatives are going to come to the table in Oman, but the Iranian regime is going to have to be willing to make a deal that's not just to address their nuclear program, but also their wanton support of terrorism and their oppression of the Iranian people. And I just don't know if there's a deal to be had there for the despotic leaders of Iran.
Yeah, I don't know either. John, what's your assessment of where things are at the moment and where this is going?
Well, in my opinion, there is no point in negotiating with the mullahs. The Iranian people need regime change, and regime change is very much in the interest of the United States. The question is how to bring it about. Unpopular tyrants can stay in power longer than one would think possible. You look at Cuba, for example. It's very hard to overthrow a government if you aren't willing to use your own soldiers, which Trump clearly isn't. So I don't know whether there's any combination of airstrikes and economic pressure that will cause the mullah's government to fall. I hope so, but on paper, it should have fallen a long time ago. And so we'll have to see how this plays out.
We'll be watching it very closely. John Hinderaka, Centre of the American Experiment President, and Nick Weinstein, Signal Principal and Pollster. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Joining us now from the UK is writer and broadcaster Esther Kraku. Esther Kraku, thank you so much for your time. The UK, well, the government is in crisis at the moment. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's leadership is hanging on by a thread over his decision to appoint Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the US despite his friendship with convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. He was sacked as ambassador last year over the friendship, but right now, plenty of questions are being raised following the recent release of the Epstein files that suggests that Peter Mandelson received money from Jeffrey Epstein and allegedly forwarded an economic briefing to Epstein while he was the business secretary back in 2009. Bring us up to speed on all of this and the latest from the UK.
So today, during Prime Minister's Question Times, Keir Starmer was forced to admit that he actually did know about Peter Mandelson's association with Jeffrey Epstein in a security briefing. So he was asked point blank in the dispatch box whether he actually knew during the vetting process, which Keir Starmer actually even celebrated Peter Mandelson coming on board before the vetting was complete. So he'd already made his mind up that this man was going to be the US ambassador. And then in sort of an embarrassing U-turn, he now had to reveal that he did know, but that Peter Mandelson misled him and his team on the extent of the relationship, which, again, is quite baffling because this was easily Googleable information. I mean, if a conservative researcher who's about 20 years old can find this on the internet, then the Labour vetting team should have been able to. But it's more about why he even brought him back in the first place. Peter Mandelson had to resign twice in disgrace from government back in 1998 and 2001, one of which was because he basically peddled his influence to get an Indian billionaire a British passport. So this is not someone who had a clean track record to begin with. But it's clear that Labour is so bereft of talent that they had to bring someone whose nickname is, I kid you not, the Prince of Darkness, into the Labour sort of high office to try and get anything done. Unfortunately, even during Peter Mandelson's brief stint as US ambassador, no one knew his name because basically Nigel Farage was our de facto ambassador, and he actually peddled more influence with the Americans than Peter Mandelson did. But his association with Jeffrey Epstein has proven to be extremely ugly. He called, Jeffrey Epstein being released from prison Liberation Day. The email exchanges between the two suggest that, Peter Mandelson was happy to use his influence to try and influence bankers' bonuses during the financial crisis, the sale of a bank, and details about a European bank bailout. This is at a time where, governments were really scrambling to try and reassure people. People were losing their jobs left, right, and center, their homes. And you had basically what was effectively the deputy prime minister at the time using his influence to get a pedophile financier and his friends whatever scraps they could. So this is what happens when you resurrect the carcasses of a man like Peter Mandelson's political career. And unfortunately, Keir Starmer is really going to try hard to ride this wave, but I don't think he'll be successful.
It'll be interesting to see if he can survive this. He's certainly in a lot of trouble over this. And he's also, Keir Starmer that is, he could be facing revolt from his own MPs. This is over something entirely different. This is over plans to house asylum seekers in newly built council homes. These include local areas such as Brighton and Hackney, and several Labor MPs are now pressuring the Prime Minister not to go ahead with this plan, Esther.
Yes, I mean, the government has denied that this new accommodation will be used to house asylum seekers. And we know that council housing is in very short supply in England. 1 in 5 people actually lives in a council home in the UK or in England. But the problem is Keir Starmer is like the king of U-turns. I mean, to date, he has, I think, about 15 U-turns that his government has done. So the problem is in the fact that he's denying that any of this accommodation will go to asylum seekers, is the fact that it's very plausible. And one underhanded way that the government is trying to get around housing asylum seekers is using HMOs, which is basically multiple occupancy homes, on people's streets. So not isolated in hotels or in army barracks. I mean, just the kind of run-of-the-mill house that you wouldn't suspect next to a school or a hospital is being used to house often what is like dozens of men that have just arrived into the country illegally via a small boat. And this is one of the things that we saw kick off the riots last summer with the Epping Bell Hotel, where a man who'd arrived by a boat earlier, I think 2 weeks earlier, had been charged with sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl in that town. So I think the big problem for Keir Starmer is not what he's saying. It's the fact that he's lost all credibility, that his own MPs just don't believe him.
He absolutely has. Let's look at the polls. First, before we get to Keir Starmer, let's talk about Reform and how it's doing in the polls. A recent Ipsos political monitor found that Reform UK maintains an 8-point lead over Labor, but this is down from November last year. And Labor continue to lose their 2024 voters to a mix of parties. And on Keir Starmer, only 15% are satisfied with the way that Keir Starmer is doing his job as Prime Minister. Now, I think that comes as a shock to absolutely no one. I mean, the fact that there are 15% is the shocking part in this, Esther. What do you make of what the polls are saying? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Conservative Party has been gaining ground as Kemi Badenoch has, had her profile risen, particularly over this Epstein scandal, which is quite the natural to and fro of government. But I think if you poll people again this week, it's probably going to swing back to Reform, especially after the high-profile defections that we've seen with Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick, who seem to be Conservatives that are more have more in common with Reform than with the Conservative Party. They tend to be more hardline Conservatives. As for the Labour Party, I think they can see that the writing is on the wall. The big test actually now is the May 7th local council elections, because the Labour Party is really expecting a complete bloodbath. And if anyone had to put their money on when Keir Starmer's premiership, it would probably be completely toast. It would be after the May 7th local council elections, particularly in Wales and Scotland, where the Labour Party is predicted to get completely thrashed.
Okay, well, Esther, I want to ask you how safe London is at the moment, because according to some media outlets, we're being told, don't believe the violent videos that we're seeing all the time online, don't believe the high crime rates, and don't believe the huge number of people who are packing up their bags and fleeing London. According to The Economist, London is far safer than violent viral videos will have you believe. It's interesting being here in Sydney, Australia, reading that, and then at the same time also seeing news articles that people like Tom Cruise, they're packing up, they're fleeing London. Tom Cruise is leaving his London apartment reportedly just after a shop near him was robbed, Esther.
Yes, I mean, what they're basically saying is close one eye and squint the other, and then put on sunglasses, and then you can pretend that London is what it is. I mean, other than from personal experience, having my friend's phone stolen on Oxford Street only a few months ago, seeing people literally being questioned by the police randomly as I was taking a walk with my friend in Knightsbridge, because some armed robbers decided to smash up, I think it was a Chanel shop, and steal whatever they could get their hands on, and the police decided to question me because I look like an armed robber, apparently. Look, the reality is the kinds of people that come up with these sorts of statements do not live in London, or live in such a leafy part of London that actually when they call the police, they turn up. If you go outside of, even outside of sort of the central areas, the data is very clear, and it's very hard to mask it in any other way. The fact is, knife crime is up. It's been up by over 50% since Keir Starmer since Sadiq Khan became London mayor. Phone thefts are through the roof, to the point where the police are not even doing anything about it. They take a crime reference number for insurance purposes and then get you on your merry way. Sexual assault, I mean, there's, I believe, a rape every few hours in London. And that's something that the Metropolitan Police, again, can't talk away or try to say, oh, but it's not that bad, because, rape is never that bad, or some sort of ridiculous excuse that they could come up with. The reality is London is deteriorating fast. The number of non-doms that you see leaving London isn't just because of the Chancellor's poor tax plans. It's because why would you, a wealthy person, live in a major city where you're not safe? You can't wear any of your luxury jewelry. A man was stabbed to death last year for his Rolex watch. A man and a father of two who just visited London with his children. I mean, where is the room to hide and to paint the picture as something that it's not? So this is the kind of things that infuriates people, because they just think that the electorate is so adrift from the people that are actually running the country. And these are the kinds of things that radicalize them.
It's just so sad. It is so shocking. And then it's kind of infuriating reading pieces like that in the media where they're just pretending what is happening in London it just does not exist. I want to talk to you about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and the Epstein files. Of course, the newly released Epstein files has just raised more questions around Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. SkyNews.com.au is reporting that King Charles is furious with Keir Starmer after Keir Starmer joined calls for Andrew to testify to Congress. Look, the Andrew allegations are incredibly damaging to the royal family. They are. But Keir Starmer, I suppose, he's really put in his place when you look at the pecking order of importance in the UK. Esther, what do you make of this story?
I mean, he made a statement about Prince Andrew having to go to the US to testify before Congress just as he was getting off a plane from China. So his excuse is that, he's been insulated for the last 4 days. Remember his trip to China, this country that we should be having closer ties with, that he trusts so much. Him and his entire team had to take burner phones and laptops because they were scared of being spied upon. But he made this remark that infuriated the king off the cuff because he hadn't actually consulted the palace. And while the Buckingham Palace has tried to do what it can do to minimize the furore around Prince Andrew and his association, or the prince formerly known as Andrew, and his association with Jeffrey Epstein, this has been very much a coordinated effort between Buckingham Palace and number 10 Downing Street. And so for Keir Starmer to go off the record and say, Prince Andrew should go to the US to testify before Congress, well, first of all, he can't be compelled to do so, which is actually what Keir Starmer said a few months before. And secondly, it's completely inappropriate for him to do that and to basically take a decision on behalf of the royal family without the king's explicit permission. You have to remember that it's King Charles that basically saved his relationship with Donald Trump. Without the royal family, Donald Trump doesn't have time for Keir Starmer, and certainly not Peter Mandelson, who was not highly regarded amongst sort of Republican top brass. So this is something that he will regret, and I'm sure the king will take him to task on that. But just even raising that and giving it life, and having Lib Dem politicians say, yes, actually, he should go to America, is going to put a lot of pressure on Buckingham Palace that they really don't need at the moment. Already, they had to smuggle Prince Andrew out of his home under the cover of darkness because they're so embarrassed by him. I'm sure at some point they'll say they're going to ship him to a village in India or something just to really get rid of him. But it's not helpful for the royal family to have these interventions by a prime minister who's basically a dead man walking.
Well, finally, I have to talk to you about the Beckhams. It appears an Oprah Winfrey sit-down interview could possibly be on the cards for Brooklyn Beckham, following reports that Meghan Markle has been offering herself as a mentor following this family breakup bombshell. The 26-year-old has apparently been receiving support from the Duchess of Sussex since he posted on Instagram about his family and the breakdown. Esther, is this a good idea for Brooklyn Beckham to be getting advice from Meghan Markle?
Well, obviously not. And, usually these kinds of insider scoops are usually quite dubious at the best of times. However, there is a form for this to actually have some credibility. We do remember that the Beckhams were actually at Prince Harry and Meghan's wedding. They grew closer to the couple after they were married because of David Beckham's acquaintance with Prince Harry, that when he used to run into him during sort of royal engagements and all of that, but it wasn't really a close friendship. And then we find out a few years later that the couple had fallen out, allegedly because the Sussexes didn't trust the Beckhams and they felt like they were the source of leaks about their private lives. So they cut off that relationship. There is some form that Meghan Markle might see herself in Brooklyn Beckham, with the slight exception that her parents are not bazillionaires and that, you know, her mother was not a Spice Girl, but I'm sure that makes no difference to Meghan Markle. Obviously, it would be a mistake for Brooklyn Beckham to entertain any more media around his family, especially because, you know, the Beckhams are not amateurs. They're not like the royal family that will say recollections may vary and just keep a dignified silence about this. The Beckhams are very, very well-seasoned media operators. And if they have to go against their own son, they will, because in as much as he's complaining about his family and the fact that, you know, they're trying to control him, they are the reason why he's able to live a life to the tunes of hundreds of millions of pounds. And his wife apparently is worth $1 billion and gets a stipend of $1 million as an allowance from her father. So, you know, there's a lot to remember there. The Beckhams are not the royal family, and they will do what they need to do to protect their own.
Writer and broadcaster Esther Kraku, thank you so much for joining us. Wonderful to speak with you.
Thank you.
That is Power Hour. Thank you for your company. We'll see you next week. Make sure you subscribe to Sky News Australia on YouTube.